Economics of wealth in a startup. We're going to cover some of the stuff about how a startup works. But before we get into the economics of wealth in a startup, some things that I've seen. There is a recent, faster, more efficient way to do downloads using Merkle trees. Basically, it takes the data, chops it up into a bunch of pieces, looks at which ones you actually got that are correct, and speeds up that kind of stuff. A good tool that uses Merkle trees for this, and rsync on Linux, has been around for decades. It does not use Merkle trees, but it does use a bunch of other hashes to improve its efficiency as it sends stuff back and forth. An adaptation of that for moving big data would be darned useful, and I think could be turned into a product. There are specialized products out there for especially video production companies for moving their videos from one place to another all across the internet. And the internet has, its tuning and its approach to things and its number of open communication channels means that if you just use standard things, it tends to overfill buffers and then it resends stuff, and it's very inefficient in how it moves large data. Whereas if you build a tool for a large data that maybe uses Merkle trees, that would be a much better, much faster way of moving it, and you tune it for where you're moving it from and to. I know the statistics on some of these video move tools is that they get 10 to 20 times the throughput that you would expect for just copying a file or uploading it over the internet. Second thing in the news, the SEC has issued a no-action letter to IMVU, classifying Vcoin, their token, as a digital asset, not as a security. It is used as basically a monetary means of trading digital assets. There's a lot of tie-in with things like stuff that you have in massive multiplayer games and other digital assets. You can use Vcoins for buying stuff in the real world. If you want to take your Vcoins and trade it into US dollars, they're going to require that you actually prove who you are. Basically, the bank that's going to transfer it is going to require knowledge about who you are as a customer to get that done. But if you're just trading digital assets, they don't care and they don't want to know. That's what that no action letter means. And that's actually a pretty big deal, because this is the SEC's first statement that yes, you can use blockchain tokens outside of the realm of securities, and that if you're using it in these ways, that they don't care. Okay, you are not subject to security laws. So this is actually quite a big deal for a lot of stuff, for tokens and tokenization of real physical assets. That as long as you're staying in the real physical asset realm, or you have a number of tokens that you're using for transferring, but it is a digital asset, that these things are not applicable to the SEC. Now, we talked a little bit about leverage and measurability in resulting in wealth. Okay? Basically, you have leverage times measurability equals wealth, is the way to look at this. And we talked some about, you can do different kinds of businesses and things like that. But the big one that is open to a lot of people in our field is being in a startup. And you see people creating wealth and not creating wealth. My first question on any startup that I'm going to be involved in is, how are you going to monetize whatever it is you're doing? You can have a wonderful idea in a startup, but no way to make money out of it, and it can be useful, but how are you going to monetize it? So usually that's my first question. My second question has to do with the financial structure of the startup. And let me explain this. If I'm going into a startup, I want to know who their investors are and what the terms are. Say that you have an A round that they got for investing, and they got $1 million. And you have a B round that was $2 million, but they didn't really get their product out fast enough. So they've got a C round that is $4 million, but it has an option on it to be able to get the $4 million back before these people get their investment back. Now, up here is the X that's going to the employees. Okay? So we've got 1 plus 2 plus 4 is $9 million into the company, and they sell the company for $10 million. And you'd go, $9 million is in, $10 million, but that $10 million means that this is worth $1 million. Okay, but that may not be the case. These people may have put in $4 million on the terms where they get $8 million out. So they got $8 million and there's $2 million left. The $2 million is now split between all of these guys out here. And your piece of ownership that you did for putting 4 years into a startup is now split into 1/4. So it's 1/4 of $2 million, which is $500K. And your percentage of this 1%, okay, is basically not that much. Okay, so this is called overhang, and whenever I work with a startup, I want to know what their capital structure is, because a startup means that I, as a person, I'm investing money into or time into their business in return for ownership. Now, this is a bad example. These kind of things happen. I've seen, and in particular, a friend of mine, Matt, he owned 25% of a company that was sold for $40 million, and because of overhang, he got $4,000 for 5 years' worth of work as his bonus. Now, what can make this really bad is that because the stock that Matt had was valued at not the minuscule amount that he got, but it was valued at $1 when he got it, and he paid taxes on that dollar, which was about 30%. He paid 30 cents on the dollar for something that ended up bringing him in 1 cent when he actually got to redeem it. So he lost 29 cents per share to the IRS for being in a startup. So these things are not golden panaceas unless you know what you're doing and you have some planning ahead. On the other hand, that's the bad side. Let's look at the good side of what can come out of a startup. Because an awful lot of the things that you're going to see that are wealth creation coming out of blockchain are going to be all these startups. And the question is, should I get involved in one? What's the terms? How much do I get out of it? Okay? And, you don't want to salt the ground that you walk on during an interview, but before you take the job, I would ask, okay, I'm interested in the job, but I've got to understand what the terms are and what I'm getting out of this before I can say yes. And I would never ask that question in the interview, but I would ask it before accepting the job, or ask it before accepting the contract with the people. So how startups create wealth? You can go work for some nice, stable company. Black Hills hires lots of UW graduates. I know a person here in computer science that just graduated in December and got a job working in their IT group at Black Hills. Good paying job. Coming straight out, they made $84K. It's decent, And they've got good benefits, the benefits probably realistically for them at their age is worth about $4,000 a year between all the stuff. So, between benefits and expenses, it's $84,000. They're living in a decent place that isn't too expensive. This is a good deal. Now, if you compare this to what you do in a startup, let's say, over time they're going to move towards the 102,204 average salary in the computer field. They'll get raises for about 5 years. And they can, let's take that. Now let's say that instead they had put this into a startup. Now, you work for a big company, there's lots of, I'd say, noise, bureaucracy, overhead, non-productive activities. So if you say that, first of all, okay, you're going to be 3x as productive because you don't have that. You don't have the pointy-haired manager telling you idiotic things to do, and you're just more productive. You focus on, here's the product, here's how we're going to build it, we're not going to mess around. And then instead of working 40 hours a week, you work 80 hours a week, because, man, you are going to turn this into something, and you're going to build it, and you're going to build it now. And you're selective. You don't just go pick something that is unimportant. You pick something that has impact, that has a way to monetize it, that has, people need this, and they are going to pay for it. So you're 3x times as productive because you've been selective of what you're working on. You would be amazed at how many computer projects in big businesses are complete nonsense things that don't make any difference to anybody. You eliminate those when you do that. So we multiply this together and we get about 18x. So you take 100K times 18x, and you ought to be making about 1.8 million a year. With the disadvantage that you don't make that up front, you make that on the tail end when you have a financial thing where you can turn this startup into actual income. And you do that for 5 years, and out of that 5 years, you get about 20 million bucks. Approximately. And do all of these work out? No. Y Combinator has about a 50% success rate in people that get into Y Combinator. I would say other people, maybe 25%. So you've got a 1 in 4 chance of this working out. But that doesn't mean you can't do more than one. After one doesn't working, you could go on to another. You're still making some money out of the process if they've raised some funds. And, I was working with a guy in this one startup, okay? I actually still own a piece of this startup to this day, but it was his third startup, and this one is making money, okay? We haven't gotten to the payout on this yet, but yeah, it's solvent. It's got customers, and they're paying bucks for it, and it's working. So he was at position 3 out of 4, basically. And that 3 out of 4, he hit the jackpot. Okay? But the other thing you get out of working in a startup, okay, is if you're working in a regular business, you get pigeonholed into, oh, I'm going to be the person that's going to be doing this little piece of the development right here. And it is in this big picture here, and that's what I'm doing. Okay? A nice thing about working in a startup is usually you are not just in charge of development, you've also got some stuff where you're going to interact with customers. And you're doing some quality assurance, and we're doing some administration, and we're working on some stuff with hiring because they're growing, and then the people doing the funding want to talk to the developers to meet them and understand what they're doing, so you're doing some business-to-business relationships. And it's not just that you're working down here, you've got all sorts of other things that are going on. And you learn a lot from these things. Okay? And some of these things can pay you a lot down the road. I worked for this company, Information Handling Services, on the product side. Okay, I built their product. I left them. I came back because their manager had some health problems, and I came back to run the project. So I went from developer to running the project. Their VP of sales quit for this project, unexpectedly. And we went into the meeting, and I went up to the owner of the business, and I said, I'll take over as VP of sales interim for a little while, and let's see if I can make it work. And he says, you have no sales experience, and I convinced him I could do the job because I'd been out doing all these other things. VP of sales paid way better than developer. But I sold basically their entire marketplace for that product. And after I'd gotten done with that, we were looking at new markets, and they wanted to do more marketing. And I said, well, can I take over in marketing? And I went on to do marketing.